האם זה באמת סגולה בדוקה? הסגולה ללמוד בזה?
Erev Tov, good evening, Dober Viatcher. We are in the Zera Shimshon on Parshas Chukat. We're going to do O's test, section number 9. A bit of a lengthy piece, so we're only going to do the first half tonight. Before we begin, we're going to take a look at 2 psukim from our Parsha, and then we're going to take a look at a pasuk from Tehillim that the Zera Shimshon quotes in his opening paragraph. Let's start with the 2 psukim. This is Bamidbar Perek Chaf, Psukim Yud Zayin and Yud Ches. And what's going on is that Moshe Rabbeinu sends a message to Melech Edom, the king of Edom. And we have to remind ourselves that Edom is Esav. Edom is the nation that came from Esav. And the Jews were up against the border of the land of Edom on their way to Eretz Canaan. And so they sent a message saying, let us pass through your land. And here are those psukim. Nabra no ve'artzecha, let us please pass through your land. Lo na'avor bisadeh uvecherem, we will not pass through your fields and vineyards, meaning we'll just stay on the road. We're not going to go through the fields and the vineyards and take any fruit or anything and damage your fields. V'lo nishte me ve'er, and we won't drink from your wells. Derech hamelech nelech, we will just stay on the path of the king, meaning the main highway. Lo nite yaminu smol ad asher na'avor givulecha. We will not turn off to the right or the left until we have completely passed through your borders. So the message Moshe sends to the king of Edom is extremely respectful, polite, courteous, diplomatic, and assuring the king of Edom that the Jews just needed to pass through. They wouldn't take anything. They wouldn't cause any problems. Vayomer elov Edom. And Edom sent a message back. Lo sa'avor bi. You will not cross through me. Pen bacherev eitzei likrosecha. Lest I come out against you with the sword. So the king of Edom's response was nowhere near the level of Moshe's diplomacy and courtesy. The king of Edom says, you're not going to pass through. We're not going to allow you to pass through. And if you do try to pass through, we're going to come, we'll fight you. We'll come out against you with the sword and attack you. And in the end, the Jewish people had to circumvent the land of Edom because they were not allowed to cross through. Okay, let's get, and then we have our pasuk in Tehillim, excuse me. This is Sefer Tehillim, Perek Nun, pasuk Chaf. Teshev be'achicha sedaber, you sit and you speak against your brother, beven imcha titen dofi, and against the son of your mother you will give slanderous talk. So this is a pasuk that is talking about some of the bad traits of Bnei Yisrael at different times, and it says you sit and talk against your own brother, and against the son of your mother, you speak slander. And of course, both of those things are bad, but we'll see that Chazal give the pasuk a very different meaning from its regular pshat, its regular simple meaning. Okay, we're ready to get into the Zera Shimshon, Os Tes. Tanchuma Parshas Pekudei. In the Medrash Tanchuma on Parshas Pekudei, the Medrash quotes this pasuk from Tehillim that we just read. Teshev be'achicha sedaber, you sit and speak against your brother. Beven imcha titein dofi, against the son of your mother, you will give slanderous talk. You'll speak slanderously. Omar Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi said about that pasuk, Omar David HaMelech, who of course was the author of Tehillim, was saying with this pasuk, Im dibarta be'esav shehu achicha, if you speak against Esav, who is your brother, sovcha ledaber biven umascha, in the end you will speak against the son of your nation. Zem Moshe Rabban shall call Hanavim. This is a reference to Moshe Rabbeinu, the greatest of the chiefs of the prophet, the chief of all of the prophets. Shedibru bo, that the people even spoke against Moshe. Shenemar vayedaber ha'am belokimu v'Moshe. This is a pasuk a little later in our parsha. It says the people spoke against Hashem and against Moshe. Ad kan leshono. Until here is a quote from the Medrash Tanchuma. So let's pause for a moment. The Medrash Tanchuma is saying that when the pasuk in Tehillim seem to kind of innocuously say that one of the bad things that the Jewish people sometimes do is speak against each other. One person speaks against his brother, and one person slanders another member of the people. So actually, that pasuk had a very specific intent in mind, which is to say as follows. If you speak against your brother, meaning Esav, if you say bad things about Esav, in the end, that will lead you to even say bad things against Moshe Rabbeinu. And that, of course, is a very strange and cryptic and almost shocking kind of statement. How come we can't say bad things about Esav? And why should we ever be worried that if we say something bad about Esav or his descendants, it's going to lead us to say something against Moshe? And that's the Zera Shimshon's question coming up. Yesh ledaktek ma inyan zeh lezeh. We need to analyze, this is the fundamental question of the whole piece, what's the connection between one thing and another? Why is it that the Medrash is drawing a connection between speaking against negatively about Esav and his descendants and saying that'll lead us to speak negatively about Moshe Rabbeinu? What conceivable connection is there? Next paragraph. Ve'efshar sheba lirmos l'ma shesholach Moshe lemelech Edom. Zera Shimshon says perhaps this is alluding to us to the message that Moshe sent to the king of Edom. And here's a quote. Ko amar achicha Yisrael. So says your brother Yisrael. Meaning when Moshe sent a message to the king of Edom, he didn't just say, dear king, we are a people who are traveling. We're a traveling people and we'd like permission to pass through your land. He said, we're your brethren. We are your brothers, the Jewish people, because we are descendants of Yaakov, and Yaakov was the brother of Esav, and you, nation of Edom, are descendants of Esav. So it's like Yaakov and Esav meeting, and they were brothers. So says your brother Yisrael, we're your cousins. We're related. We're family. Let us pass through the land. Shehizkir Shem Achava. Moshe Rabbeinu mentioned this concept of brotherhood. Kedei shahamelech Edom yitain lo rishus lavor. In order that the king of Edom would give permission for the Jews to pass through. So Moshe was being very strategic here. He wasn't mentioning the fact that there was a family relationship, a familial relationship between the Jews and Edom just as a nice thing. He was saying to the king, he was buttering up the king of Edom. We're not just strangers. We're not just foreigners. We are your brethren. We're your cousins. We have a historical family relationship. And as relatives, we're asking you to please let us pass through your land. V'hoyu mavtichim lo, and they were promising the king of Edom, shelo ligrum lo shum nezek, that they would not cause any damage to the land. Kedichsiv, as the pasuk says, this is also a pasuk that we read before we began this section. Lo navor bisode uvecherem. We're not going to pass through your fields and your vineyards. V'lo nishte me be'er, and we won't drink. We won't just take water from your wells. So Moshe was again being very careful here in the message. Number one, we're your relatives. We're family. Please let us pass through. Number two, as families, we're going to respect your land and your property and your fruits and your vineyards and your water. We're going to behave appropriately and properly and respectfully like family. Ukimoshe kosvu hameforshim, as the meforshim write about Moshe's request. Va'afal pichein, and even though Moshe phrased everything so nicely and with such respect and mentioning the family connections, nonetheless, lo rotze Edom liten lo rishus, the king of Edom did not want to give and did not in fact give permission for the Jewish people to pass through the land. Umi sheshomea davar zeh. someone who hears about this episode, reads about it in the Torah, or hears about this story, bevadai sheyomar, certainly that person will say, she'edom lo shamar bris achim mitchila, that Edom, the people of Edom at this time, did not properly protect and reflect the covenant of brothers from the start of the episode. Right from the beginning, Moshe Rabbeinu talked about we're brothers, we're family, and the king of Edom rejected that completely. No, I don't care what you say. I don't care about history and family connections. We're not going to let you pass through. The od hosif al chet pesha. And not only that, but the king of Edom added to this sin, belev ra uvelial, with an irresponsible and evil threat, because the king of Edom said, we're not going to let you come through, and if you do try to come through, we're going to attack you. So that's really, really strong and inappropriate and terrible, a sinister way to conduct themselves. So clearly Edom looks very bad in the story. When Moshe is talking about family and history and connections and a proper behavior and diplomacy, Edom responds with hatred and malice and threats. So Edom, again, the descendants of Esau, look very bad in this story. Next paragraph. Umizeh yovo ktsas genai v'dofi leMoshe Rabbeinu olav hashalom. And from this episode, a little bit of something embarrassing, of something a little indecorous, a little inappropriate comes out about Moshe Rabbeinu. B'mashe kosav asif sechohen, and this we learn from the commentator on the Chumash Sifsei Chohen, shahatam shesholach Moshe malochem el melech Edom, that the real reason that Moshe sent these messengers to the king of Edom, hoyekidei leha'ashimo, was in order to make him look guilty. Moshe was not so innocent here. He wasn't just innocently and naively and diplomatically asking for permission. He actually wanted to make the king of Edom bear the guilt of his negative response. Ulohosif al chatoso pesha, and to add to his sin, further sin. Moshe wanted the king of Edom to come out of this episode looking as badly and actually being a full sinner as much as possible. Im lo yitein lahem achsanya, if he would refuse to give them hospitality. So Moshe actually had an intention that if the king of Edom refused to let the Jewish people pass through, he wanted to make sure that the king of Edom would bear the full guilt and responsibility for that. Ki min haro'oi, because it would have been appropriate, hayulo litain, for the king of Edom to give permission, lefi sheparu chov avihem v'chulei, because the Jewish people had paid off a debt of their forefathers. Ad kan lishono, until here is a quote from the commentary Sifsei Kohen. So we have to stop to understand this very, very unusual and important idea about the Jewish people paying off a debt that the nation of Edom, the descendants of Esau, owed. The Jewish people had covered the debt for them, and therefore the nation of Edom certainly had an obligation to help out the Jews and let them pass through their land when they were asked to do so. So here's what's going on. Here's the explanation of that. Going back to the bris bein habisarim, the famous covenant of the parts, in which Hashem told to Avram Avinu, communicated to Avram Avinu, that in the future his children, his descendants, would be strangers in a foreign land and would be enslaved there and suffer there. So Esau was a grandson of Avram Avinu. Avram Avinu had a son named Yitzchak. Avram and Sarah, of course, had a son named Yitzchak. Yitzchak married Rivka, and together they had Yaakov and Esau. So Esau was a member of the family. He was a grandson of Avraham. So when Hashem said, your descendants will be strangers in this foreign land and be enslaved there. That should have not only included Yaakov and his descendants, meaning the Jewish people, it should have included Esav and his descendants, the nation of Edom. But the nation of Edom escaped. They were not enslaved anywhere. They were not foreigners in a foreign land. They received their own land, and they were safe and happy there. And so, who did become foreigners, strangers, and slaves in a foreign land? Of course, it's referring to the Jewish people in Eretz Mitzrayim. And so, by taking the full brunt and the full amount of suffering that Esav and his descendants should have shared in, by taking that completely upon ourselves, the Jewish people, so to speak, paid off a debt. They covered a debt that the nation of Edom, the descendants of Esav, should have had to at least cover part of themselves. But they got off scot-free. So therefore, the Sifsei Kohen says, Moshe Rabbeinu was very, very well aware that the people of Edom had a total obligation to allow the Jewish people to cross through their country and to treat the Jewish people with great kindness and hospitality, because not only were we family connections and related, but we had paid off a debt and had suffered for 210 years in Egypt, a suffering that they did not experience for even 1 day or 1 hour. And therefore, Moshe Rabbeinu knew the score, and he wanted to make it clear to the king of Edom and state his case clearly to say, you really owe us. We're not strangers. We're descendants of the same family. You come from Esav. We come from his brother Yaakov. We suffered in Mitzrayim. We paid off the debt of the Bris Bein Abisarim, and you guys didn't. And therefore, you certainly should let us pass through your land and show us every hospitality and every kindness. That's what Moshe had in mind when he mentioned the family connection between Bnei Yisrael and Bnei Esav. V'im kain, next paragraph on the top left, column on the left. V'im kain, and if so, mi sheyedaber ra al melech Edom, anyone who speaks badly about the king of Edom and brings up this story from the Torah and says, look how rude, how impolite, how inappropriate, how undiplomatic, how violent and bellicose the people of Edom were. Anyone who says that, yitain dofel Moshe, they're also going to be reflecting poorly on Moshe. Shenosan michshol lefonov. Moshe intentionally put this stumbling block in front of the king of Edom. Moshe wanted to make it clear that if the king of Edom said no, he would bear his guilt before history. Lishloach lozeh hashlichos kedei lahachatio. And Moshe sent the messengers to the king of Edom in order to cause him to sin and to be guilty and pay for his lack of kindness and hospitality. Ve'ein zeh min haro'oi leish choshuv k'Moshe. And something like this kind of intention, this kind of stratagem, is not appropriate for a great man like Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu should not have conducted himself in this way. Sheyite ve'yachshel es habrios, that he would trick and would cause a fellow human being to stumble in this matter. Vizehu, and this is what it means when it says in the Medrash Tanchuma in our opening paragraph, im dibarta be'esav shehu achicha. This is from the Pasuk in Tehillim, from the Chazal's understanding of the Pasuk in Tehillim. If you speak against your brother Esav, meaning you speak against the people of Edom, the descendants of Esav, because of this story, Sofcha ledaber bevenu moscha zeh Moshe, in the end, you're going to end up speaking badly against the great son of your own people, which is Moshe, shehu hayeshagorom lozo, who caused this to happen to the king and people of Edom. Now, we need to add one more point that the Zera Shimshon doesn't state explicitly. In the Sifsei Kohen, it's not just a matter of Moshe making it clear to the king of Edom the history and the family connections and the debt that they owe the Jewish people. But he says, he implies that Moshe Rabbeinu knew that the king of Edom was going to refuse passage. So if Moshe Rabbeinu already knew that the king of Edom was going to refuse passage, he didn't have to lay it on so thick and talk about we're brothers, we're family, you owe us, we have a connection, a deep connection. Why did he do that? And the answer is he did that even though he knew that the king of Edom was going to refuse, or dafka because he knew that, in order to really, really heap on the guilt and increase and magnify the sin of the king of Edom through his refusal to let the Jewish people pass through his land. So that's why we have something, the story reflects negatively upon Moshe Rabbeinu. Next paragraph. V'im tomar, and if you say, v'halo af mitchila, even from the very beginning, kodem sheyedaber be'esav, before a person says anything badly about Esav and his descendants, yesh mokum lo seis dofi Moshe. You could say something that Moshe did something inappropriate here. In other words, you don't need to say anything negative about Edom. Let's say you decide, you know what, it was their own country, as we'll see momentarily in the Zera Shimshon himself. Maybe you reason and say, you know what, the king of Edom, like any king, has a right, like any ruler has a right to tell people, we don't want you, this is not a good time for us for you to pass through our country. We don't want you to pass through. So let's say you cut some slack to the people of Edom, the descendants of Esav, and you say, you know what, I'm not worried about criticizing them. I don't care about that. Nonetheless, you still are going to have something negative to say about Moshe because of his conscious setting up of the king of Edom to bear this terrible guilt for saying no, even though Moshe knew he was going to say no. Yesh lomar, so we can answer and say, She'im Moshe lo haya mazkir ha'achlo. If Moshe had not mentioned and stressed the idea of brotherhood between the people, the descendants of Esav and the descendants of Yaakov Avinu, ein shum dofe Moshe, then there would have been nothing negative to say about Moshe. Shahare hakol haya ose l'tovas Yisrael, because then everything that Moshe was doing would have been for the good of the Jewish people. Let's say Moshe didn't mention the history and the family relation and connection, and didn't mention any of that, and he just said, as if the Jews were any nation, please let us pass through your land, we'll behave appropriately, we won't damage your fields, we won't drink your water without permission or without buying water, we just please let us pass through. If that's all that Moshe had said, then of course there would be no negative intentions and nothing negative to say about Moshe's behavior, Moshe's conduct here. Because everything he was doing was for the benefit of the Jewish people. Passing through the land of Edom would have helped the Jews and shortened their trip. V'gam lo lemelech Edom shelo nosan lahem reshus lavo. And also there would have been negative about the king of Edom's refusal. Ki chein mishpat hamalucha, because so is the law of the kingship, meaning kings have every right, they have the full right to decide whether or not a foreign people can pass through the land. K'dichsiv, as a pasuk in the Torah says from Sefer Vayikra, v'cherev lo savor ba'artzachem. And one of the brachos given to the Jewish people, one of the blessings given to the Jewish people, the Torah says, the sword will not pass through your land. There will be no fighting and no war in your land. But Chazal add to that, afilu cherev shel shalom, even an army that's coming in peace will not pass through your land. So it's a blessing that the Jews receive, that foreign countries, foreign armies, even if they're peaceful and they're not going to hurt anybody, they still won't pass through the land. And so it's the prerogative of kings to say, I understand that you're saying you won't damage our land and you won't take things without permission or without paying for them, and you won't do any harm, and you'll stick to the main road and go right through our land as quickly as you can. Nonetheless, the king of Edom still had a right to refuse, the right of refusal. That's the right that kings and governments have. Elisha Moshe hizkir ha'achva. But that's not what happened, because Moshe chose to play the brotherhood card. He did say, we are your brethren, we're the Jewish people, descendants of Yaakov. You're the descendants of Esau, Yaakov's brother. He did talk about it. He did emphasize it. Kamosha Pirish Rashi, as Rashi explains. Umiyod b'makom ledaber neged melech Edom. And as soon as Moshe mentioned that, then it does portray the king of Edom in a bad light, that he refused to honor his family connections and his responsibilities. Umamela yesh makom ledaber af neged Moshe. And therefore, once we're looking at the story in a different light and we're saying, wow, this really does reflect poorly on the king of Edom, then we also have to take a deeper look at the story and realize that it reflects somewhat indirectly, it reflects somewhat negatively about Moshe as well. Next paragraph. Avoladayin yesh ledaktek, but we still need to analyze. Shemevi raya shesofam ledaber b'Moshe. The pasuk that the Medrash, again, going back to the first paragraph, the pasuk that is brought in the Medrash Tanchuma about the people in the end speaking badly about Moshe, midichsiv, comes from a pasuk vayedaber ha'am belokimu v'Moshe, that says the people would speak against Hashem and Moshe. The pasuk says they wouldn't just talk against Moshe, they would talk against Hashem and Moshe. V'halo af belokim dibru. So we see clearly in the pasuk that the people spoke against Hashem and Moshe. V'imkein, if so, hoyulo lemedrash lomar, the Medrash should have said, sovcha ledaber beven umoscha uve Elokim. If you speak against Edom, if you speak against Esau and his descendants, the Edom and the king of Edom, because of this story, in the end, you're destined to speak against Moshe Rabbeinu and Hashem. V'loma amar beven umosecha levad. So why did the pasuk in Tehillim say you're only going in the end to speak against the son of your nation, meaning Moshe Rabbeinu only? Why wasn't the pasuk in Tehillim faithful to the full text in the Torah where it says the people spoke against Hashem and Moshe, and the pasuk in Tehillim only chose to say you're going to speak against Moshe. Didn't mention speaking against Hashem. V'od, and another question, the Tshuvas Melech Edom, in the response that the king of Edom gave, Lo savor bi, you will not pass in me, pen bacher v'etzei likrosecha, lest perhaps I come out against you with the sword. Mahu, now we're about to move to the next page on the right. Mahu haloshon shel lo savor bi. What is this language that the king of Edom used? You will not pass over in me. Hoyulo lomar, the king of Edom should have said, lo savor bigavuli, you will not pass in my borders, into my land. What did the king of Edom mean by saying you will not pass in me? Nobody was talking about crossing through the body of the king of Edom. Nobody wanted to go through him. Nobody even wanted to go through his house or his palace. So what did he mean and said the king of Edom mean when he said, you will not pass be in me? What does that even mean? Umahu pen bacherev. And what did the king of Edom mean in his response when he said, perhaps I will come out against you with the sword? Hoyulo lomar, he should have said, ki bacherev. If you try and come through our land, you will not come through our land, ki bacher, because I'll come out against you with the sword. Not perhaps I'll come out, or lest I'll come out. V'chi eno yodea hu, is it possible the king of Edom himself did not know moho yebedato lasos, what it was in his mind to do? Was he unsure of whether or not he would attack the Jews if they tried to forcibly pass through his land? No, obviously not. Of course, the king of Edom knew that he had an army, and that if the Jews said, we don't care that you're refusing, we're still going to come into your land, the king of Edom knew that there would be a war, that he was planning to have his army attack them. So what did he mean when he said, pen, perhaps, lest, maybe I'll attack you? Didn't he know he was going to attack them? And if so, why didn't he say, if you come into our land, we're going to attack you? So these are questions that the Zera Shimshon still wants to answer in order to fully understand the story. Now, we're going to stop here, but in order not to leave us completely hanging like a cliffhanger, I want to give a little bit of a glimpse into the second half of this piece. What the Zera Shimshon does is he brings in a Kabbalistic sefer, and he brings in an entirely new way of understanding the story that really changes everything. And then in the end, he's able to use this whole new approach to understanding the story to go back and answer these last questions and give deeper insights as to what was happening. And just to give a little bit of a foretaste of of that new approach, the new approach says that Moshe Rabbeinu really was not at all naive or innocent here. Moshe Rabbeinu wanted very consciously to weaken and, if possible, to destroy the nation of Edom, because he viewed them as a great threat to the Jewish people, and he wanted to do that in a spiritual way, on a spiritual level. So when Moshe says to the king of Edom, we won't go into your fields and we won't go into your vineyards and we won't take your water, what he was actually saying was, physically, our intention is not to harm you at all, but spiritually, as we pass through your land, we're going to do all kinds of things that will spiritually weaken you and reduce the threat that you pose to the Jewish people. That was really Moshe's intention. Had the king of Edom said, yes, you can pass through, there would not have been a happy ending for them. It wasn't a case where Moshe really wanted there to be a happy ending. Let us pass through and we'll be nice and kind and diplomatic and not harm you in any way. That was not Moshe's intention, according to this Kabbalistic source. Moshe's intention was, sure, we're willing to commit to not harming you physically in any way. We're not looking for war or fighting, and we're not looking to damage your land or steal any water or property from you. What we want to do is pass through your land and harm you and weaken you in spiritual ways, which we know how to do, and then we'll reduce or maybe even eliminate you, Edom, as a threat to the Jewish people in the future. So that's the approach that the Zera Shimshon explains and articulates in the second half of the piece. And then with that whole new approach, he's able to go back and explain and answer the questions about the unusual, some of the unusual things that were part of the dialogue between Moshe with his message to the king of Edom and the king of Edom's response to Moshe Rabbeinu. But that we have to save, God willing, until next time. Yasher Koch for joining in the learning in the Zera Shimshon this week. We look forward to learning again in the Zera Shimshon, God willing, in next week's Parsha.